We've got it for future listeners. So yeah, welcome everyone to this webinar. So it's in collaboration between Charterpath and Governors for Schools. And what we're going to go through over the next 45 minutes to an hour is basically everything you need to know about becoming a school governor. So a great chance to kind of get some better understanding about the role, but also some top tips and a chance to be a bit interactive in terms we've got a Q&A as part of this session. Just quick background to Charterpath before we kick off. So my name is Alex Marsh. I'm one of the co-founders of Charterpath, and my other co-founder Alice is on this webinar also. At Charterpath, our mission is to chart a path between accountants and the non-profit sector to get more accountants to be volunteering their skills, their financial skills, to help the non-profit sector. And when we think about this topic today, why are we focusing specifically on the school governor role? This school governor roles is a great entryway into volunteering in the non-profit sector. They're very structured roles. There's lots of support available, and we'll find a bit more about that in this session. But really importantly as well, when we go look at recent research from the Department for Education, actually financial skills is one of the most sought after skills amongst the governing boards of schools. So really important opportunity for individuals with financial skills, accountants, bookkeepers, financial professionals to make a huge difference to the education sector. So yeah, just a bit of background on this session. So really pleased to say that from Governors for Schools, we're joined by Emma Harris. Emma is the leads on governor recruitment for Governors for Schools. So she's an absolute expert, and we'll be able to answer any questions you might have about what it means to be a school governor. As I say, Alice and I, as part of today's session, will be doing a Q&A with Emma as well. So can find out a bit more about both our backgrounds, as both of us are school governors as well. So before we get going, and I hand over to Emma, we thought we'd quickly start with a poll to find out a bit more about those who've joined. So Alice will have just launched the poll, so you can vote within the poll. So we're looking at two things. Do you currently volunteer as a school governor? But also, are you a finance professional? So I want to make sure we kind of tailor the content for today's session appropriately. So just to find out whether you're a finance professional, whether you've joined and you're not currently a finance professional. So we'll just leave a couple more seconds for those polls. If you can jump in, let's have a look. One more second if you haven't had a chance to respond. I think Alice.
Yeah, so good news is everybody's here to find out more about being a school governor. So that makes it easy, target audience. And then we've got two who are from finance background, finance professionals, and one person who isn't. I suppose just to say, this session is very much for everybody. We will have a kind of finance slant on it, but we'll talk through all the benefits about being a school governor and what you need to know, which very much applies whether you're from a finance background or not. So I think you should still find the session really useful.
Brilliant. So I suggest we hand over to Emma. Over to you, Emma. And look forward to finding out more about what it means to be a school governor. Thank you.
Lovely, thanks Alex. So yeah, just to introduce myself, my name's Emma Harris. As Alex said, I'm head of governor recruitment at Governors for Schools, and I'm also a school governor myself at a local primary school. I've been there for 3 years, and I was at a maintained nursery before, so there must be something in it because I've gone on to 2 schools. I'll be here today to tell you a little bit about what Governors for Schools do, who we are as a charity, what the governor role actually entails, and how we get you started, because hopefully by the end you'll be fully motivated to share your skills with lots of the schools in need. So just as a bit of background, what the Governors for Schools do, we're an independent education charity. We work across the whole of England and Wales, supporting state-funded schools to fill their governing boards. The way that we do that is that we try to find talented and committed people like yourself through partners like Charterpath. Try to kind of really give you a very realistic view of what is involved in being a governor, because it is a long-term commitment and it is about you sharing your expertise and your time. And then once we've placed you, we give you lots of support so that actually once you're in the role, you're going to be really effective and you're going to get the most out of it. So just to we're all in the right webinar session, being a governor is a volunteer role. It's very much strategic rather than operational. So if you're looking for something to work directly with students, that might be something that comes from being a governor at the school and having governor connections, but the actual governor role is strategic. It's about working with the school leadership to make sure that the education delivered for every child is as effective as possible. If about why do we need school governors, I know Alex already mentioned the DfE research about finance skills being most sought after, and that's definitely backed up by what we see when schools register vacancies with us. As you'll see, we've got over 5,000 vacancies registered with us, and that's not even every single vacancy. Every single school board will have a governing board, and the vast majority of those have 1 or 2 vacancies. So there's plenty of opportunity. You'll see from the pie chart there that most vacancies are at primary level, and that is very simply because most schools are primary schools. But we do support the schools all the way from being a local authority nursery school or a nursery as part of an academy, all the way up to further education colleges and everything in between as well, including things like pupil referral units, special educational needs schools. And if you've not had experience of those schools yourself, perhaps if you're only in a mainstream school, don't let that put you off. We'd really encourage you to be really open, particularly with finance skills, but actually for anybody. You don't have to be the educationalists at the board table. You will bring something else to the table. So don't feel like just as you've not experienced it, you won't be able to have a really positive impact in those schools. So there are 3 core strands to governor responsibility. You'll see financial management, that's squarely in the middle there. But essentially it is about strategy, financial management, and creating robust accountability. And I'm just going to go into those 3 in a bit more detail, and then we'll bring in Alice and Alex to talk a little bit about their experience as well. So as a governor, you play a key role in setting the vision for the school and helping the head to really think about how it builds into all areas of the curriculum, the space that you're using, the staff that you've got, really thinking about, is that vision ambitious for every single child? So is it as applicable to your special educational needs pupils as your pupils with English as an additional language, and making sure that everybody is covered within that vision. And if you've got a really clear vision, that will be your blueprint for a success. It's something that you will come back to as a governing board over and over again and look at your progress against school improvement and look at how things are developing. So it ends up you'll have a working document, often called a school improvement plan, and that's something you will keep coming back to make sure you're on the right track. So governors don't set the budget, but they must oversee it and ensure that it's spent in line with strategic vision, and make sure that value for money is being achieved. As I've mentioned, financial acumen is the most requested skill asked for by the schools that use our service. It's really about thinking how you can use your skills to support people like the school business manager, how you can really help balance, quite difficult and challenging needs of the school. You'll also be working on the board with people with very different priorities as well. So there will be staff governors on the board, there'll be parent governors on the board, and you have to work really collaboratively and collectively to make sure that you're balancing that budget in a really, effective way that does sit with the strategic vision. But you'll also have to make some really tough decisions. School budgets are very much finite, and you have to get a lot out of them. So it's where your skills from the business side and being able to kind of apply that different perspective will be really, really useful. Just moving on. Here's a bit of interaction to make sure everybody's listening. So it'd be really good if you have a go at this question for me. What percentage of the budget do you think might be spent on staffing? And if you wanted to pop that into the chat or speak out, that would be great. Let's have a look if anybody's got any ideas. Yes, of 75 from Alex. Anybody else want to hazard a guess? Thanks, Rick. Ellie, Daniel, 67. Right, a bit of a mix up. That's always good. I don't want the answer to be too obvious. The answer is, not that surprisingly, I guess, but it's 75%. In some schools, it can be as much as 90% is spent on staffing. And if you think about all the other things that you need to manage within a budget, like looking after the building and making sure that there is curriculum support materials and enrichment opportunities, it's a really tough job. And that's where your skills will really come to the fore. Also thinking about things like the income of a school as well. So it's not all spending money. I know at my school, we're just about to open a nursery. And so it's really been a challenge to think about, right, well, how do we balance the income that we're going to get from this nursery against what we're going to spend on staffing, thinking about things like after school clubs, opportunities to rent out buildings as well. So it definitely sits on both sides. Yes, excellent, thank you. Just moving on to of that bit of the 3 key strands of responsibility. This is sometimes referred to as being a critical friend, but robust accountability, more than anything, is about having curiosity and asking questions. So as a governor, you're there to not just accept what you're told, you will be there like a watchdog to make sure there is evidence behind everything that the head teacher asserts. You'll also be a mediator. So I've already talked about the people you'll be sat on the board with who will have different priorities, but you've also got a really broad range of stakeholders in a school. Obviously, there's the students, but then there's the families, there's the local community, there's lots of other people involved in the school, much wider community, and you have to balance those needs as well. And lastly, and I think probably the most satisfying bit, is you get to be a champion of that school. You will get to really understand the context and the challenges and the opportunities for that school. And so when there is success, you really need to celebrate it. At my school, for example, yesterday, there was an Oscars event. And so the governors were invited to go and, really show the appreciation for all the work that the pupils have put in the last year. So there are those really nice bits as well. Moving on to what's it like to be a governor. So Alice and Alex, could you both just give me a little bit of summary about your experience? Maybe if we start with you first, Alice.
Yeah, absolutely. So I became I suppose background wise, I trained as a chartered accountant at PwC and went on to have a career in banking, moving from finance slightly over to kind of risk and credit, but always staying a bit kind of plugged into finance because it seems to be the center of all things and connects all things together. I became a school governor, or started volunteering when I was a trainee accountant for charity, but actually became a school governor later on in my career, about 3 years ago. I'm a governor of an independent girls' boarding school in Ascot, 400 pupils. From starting as a governor, I became chair of the Finance and Operations General Purpose Committee in January this year. So I'm still relatively new, but I feel like even in the past 3 years, I've gained a lot of experience, and then it plays well into the trustee roles that I had before.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alice. Alex, can you give us a bit of a whistle-stop tour?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I trained with Alice originally at PwC as an accountant too. So that's how we got to know each other and sort of background to Charterpath. I became a school governor when I moved back down to Brighton. So I'd lived in London for over 10 years, moved back down to Brighton and became a governor 7 years ago. In that 7 years, I've done quite a few different roles. I started off as the finance governor, finance link governor. But then spent 4 years as chair of governors, which was amazing, tough, but amazing. It was during obviously the pandemic. The school where I'm a governor, Varndine School, it's right in the centre of Brighton, got over 1,500 students in the age 11 to 16, mixed state school funded school. So yeah, I love it. Yeah, carried on being a governor after I finished my term as chair. That shows that, it's a great role because I've carried on being involved.
Absolutely. It's lovely to hear that you've stayed on even longer than you needed to. That's definitely a good sign. What do you think it was that got you motivated to, apply your skills in school governance over anything else?
Yeah, well, so for myself, it was part of it was that move back down to Brighton. So it's, getting back to know the community and contribute back to the community. That that was definitely part of it. Get to meet some more people and know some more people. But sort of the other side of it, which I'm quite open about, is that at the time I was professionally, I was, looking to kind of build my skills and, build my experience. And I was speaking at a conference, you had to upload your biography, and I was writing that up and I saw the bios for the other people speaking. And it sort of dawned on me that I wasn't doing anything outside of my job at the time, and everyone else had all these other things they were doing, volunteering or sitting on industry groups. So I didn't have anything. And it was that part of that, just, looking through, and I saw someone who was a school governor, and it sort of prompted me to then get in touch with the, school I'd attended, since, when I grew up in Brighton. And, it just happened from that very, very quickly. Within a few months, I was, a governor within the school. So that was the starting point. And then, from there, it's, led through to lots of other opportunities in the non-profit sector, which has been amazing.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. Alice, how do you think your financial acumen and skills have benefited you in the role and benefited the
So much. So I suppose going back to what you said at the beginning, I think in any school, like in many organizations, finance, just plays such a critical role, and the budgets are so tight that it becomes central to kind of every decision in many ways. When I took on this role, the bursar of the school, who is an amazing bursar, incredibly experienced, been at school a very long time, was very open about the fact that he didn't have any sort of formal training experience, like as an accountant or anything like that, which absolutely doesn't affect his ability to do the role, because being a school bursar, you're in charge of essentially running the entire school and all the logistics. He has an army background as a bomb disposal expert, which I think came incredibly in handy, keeping his cool and doing kind of things like COVID marquees and all of the kind of incredible work that goes into running schools, particularly in difficult situations. However, he was therefore very grateful for having people with financial skills around him to provide that additional support. And so I've been involved in so many different areas. You've got the fundamentals, so in terms of the accounts and the annual audit, and where I can play a big role in kind of helping to review and input into those accounts, and then also sort of seeing the feedback from the auditors, and sort of, again, I suppose, helping to give perspective on the audit findings and thinking about how they compare to what I've seen elsewhere in my career, and helping to support on any of the more kind of technical issues. The big process that goes on every year that's incredibly time consuming is the budget. In an independent school, it's so slightly different from a state school, in that you've got this big dynamic about where you set the fees and how you price the product that you're selling, which a huge amount of thought goes into. And there's a lot to do around kind of sensitivity analysis and thinking about where the money needs to be spent. As you said so eloquently earlier, Emma, understanding which of our buildings need investment in, and complexities around sort of explaining how the budget and the profit and loss links to the cash flow, and whether or not depreciation, kind of what depreciation means, and supporting the bursar and explaining that to the other governors, and understanding that as well as sort of being able to run the school, we also need to invest in these facilities. So I think the financial skills really kind of came into handy there, and being able to kind of translate these sort of technical matters into more sort of simple language. There's then a whole host of kind of technical areas as well, such as pensions, or as I say, kind of fees, energy outputs. There's this huge area that really in many ways sort of extends beyond my pure kind of accounting skills that I had when I was in practice and even later on, but that sort of softer skill set around kind of leadership and critical review and challenge, those skills really kind of come into play, and I realized that I can apply them to lots of different areas, thinking about how to kind of present and review topics. So that's been incredibly helpful. And then I suppose things like reviewing policies and processes and controls, segregation of duties. And a lot of those areas are things that I'm a little bit rusty on, in the sense that I haven't had to think about cash flows and segregation of duties for a long time, but it still very much stays with me. So I'm able to kind of review the proposal that the bursar has done and just sense check it, and just provide that independent thought that I think is really valuable for a management team that are so busy and have just got 400 pupils to look after day to day. So having an extra input on those areas has been great. And then I suppose the final thing I would just say is the overarching strategy. So when it comes to decisions about investment, again, I feel as a finance professional, you've had that training around how to assess different propositions and the cost benefit analysis, and thinking about the risks associated with each one. So even on those very strategic decisions, which is clearly a really critical role to being a governor, despite not having a huge experience of school, like it was quite a long time since I was at school, I don't have children at school, I still feel I can add a huge amount because of that sort of, I suppose, fresh pair of eyes, but also familiarity with how you kind of set a good strategy, and those skills become very transferable. So sorry, there's quite a lot, but hopefully it makes sense. I mean, I think it might be worth getting Alex's view on this as well, because I'm sure he's got some specific examples of where his finance skills came in handy.
Yeah, just briefly. I mean, I think you covered it well. It's like I think one point that your comments raised is just the sheer variety of activities that you can get involved in and can support on. I think that part about I think for, in our school, the finance manager, it can be at times for that individual bit of a lonely role, because often you're kind of going around to lots of teachers or heads of departments that say, no, you can't have this, no, you can't have that. And you're kind of the one who's sort of holding the purse strings. And so I think having, governor or governors with financial skills who can support them and be that critical friend and challenge and be a sense check is just such an important and valuable role, as you say, particularly in the feed up into when they're presenting, the budget and 3-year plans, and they're looking, in our case, looking to get those approved by the governing body and then submit them through to the local authority, which is part of the process that we follow. That's hugely important to them. I think when I look back on our school in the time that I've been a governor there, we've had quite large school expansion, both in terms of number of students, but also in terms of the facilities. We were fortunate to secure some funding for facility improvements. And again, I think having governors with financial skills to help oversee those things, which are not like the day-to-day running of the school, they're different. They're like projects or initiatives. And I think having, again, governors who can kind of step in and maybe provide a bit more support then than you normally would provide in the day-to-day to help make sure that those programs or projects are run, well and efficiently and deliver the objectives, but also within budget is really important. We had, from COVID, for example, some additional sort of catch-up funding. So making sure that was used in a really good way to help the students most in need who needed support to catch up was really important. So yeah, just a lot of variety. As Alice said, sometimes like my technical accounting skills maybe aren't the greatest or the strongest, but I think the skills that I've developed in professional career can help support that, and I can learn and research, as required if things get a bit more technical, or find someone else that we can ask to get the right answer. It's as much that sometimes, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right that sometimes for the school business manager, it is a lonely role, and just having somebody else sat around the table at the board who's got that deeper understanding of where the budget is at just makes for a much more effective conversation about where is the school going, what is practical, how are we going to get there.
Yeah, and I think the point you raised, Emma, about like with governing bodies, there's lots of people with different skills. We're very fortunate our governing body. We've got people who work or are involved in the education sector, so they've got really good knowledge that I don't have, to challenge on sort of the quality of teaching and the breadth of curriculum that maybe isn't necessarily my strong point or background. But you bring that collection of skills together where they might then be looking to go, look, this is what we want to do, and then this is how much, that's cost, or can we make that work within the finances? But collectively we bring that together so that I don't have, say when I was finance link governor, I didn't have sole responsibility for all the governors, to your point about the different responsibilities. But I suppose I can go maybe that level slightly deeper offline for the meetings to challenge or give advice.
Yeah, definitely. Which reminds me of something you said, Alice. And just to be really clear, that you don't need to be a parent. You don't have to have worked in education. You don't need to have set foot in a school since you left when you were 16. But you do need to have that passion and that interest and that curiosity, which obviously shines through from Alex and Alice in terms of what you do. I think the other thing that just kind of made me think is you mentioned about being rusty in some of the areas that you actually then get to use when you're on a governing board. And I think it's really important to take that on board. And Alex has mentioned it as well, that you don't have to be good at everything. That's the point of a governing board. So we get asked for HR skills, marketing, data analysis, tech. It's a real variety, and finance skills is one really crucial, but part of that. And you get the opportunity to work with people from really different backgrounds, really different levels of expertise. And that makes it a really exciting opportunity as well.
The one thing, Emma, I'd add on that is I think it is really important to be clear on where your strengths are and where you are a bit rusty, because I do think managing expectations is kind of so important around taking on these voluntary roles. So being upfront with the school about like what your experience is, and being committed to kind of learning and investing time in the areas that you're not so familiar with. There's lots of resources out there, like at Charterpath, we try to encourage, point people to the areas where they can find these tools to kind of help them understand the difference between, for-profit accounts and not-for-profit accounts. But yeah, I think you're right. You can learn an awful amount, and you don't need to be an expert, but you just want to be clear about, what your strengths and focus areas are.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a very clear reason why I do not sit on our finance committee, for example, when I sit on our teaching and learning committee, because I've got to admit that's not my strength. But thank you, you have an accountant sat on our board, so it works out all right. Alex, how did you find sort of the level of commitment? Because obviously it is a volunteer role, you're working full time. How have you found that?
Yeah, so I think this is one of the really big strengths of school governor roles, which is why, up front, when I said I think this is such a great sort of entry route in for people, whether, particularly whether it's their, if it's their first volunteer role, because it's quite a structured role. So when I had sort of the induction to become a governor, they could tell me, like, these are the meetings for the full governing body for the next year, like they had them already scheduled. These are the finance committee meetings that we have in for the next year. They were already kind of structured. They even had, like, these are the agenda items that we have kind of penciled in for each of these meetings. This is where you'll need to give, an update on the budget and 3-year plan. So there's quite a lot of structure that it comes into the role. So for you planning, you can plan your time around it and understand, like, where you might need to put. I always know, for example, we submit our budget and 3-year plan to local authority in May each year. I always know that, like, the busier time from a finances side will be primarily that sort of March, April time, where we look at the finish of the financial results of the year before and close out that year, and then use that as an input into 3-year plan. So you can plan that. That'll be a bit busier then. Actually, it'll be a bit quieter maybe in the autumn term or something. So I think, like, that side of it, I think, is really good about these roles compared to some of my charity trustee roles. It's a bit more volatile or unknown, if you see what I mean. So I think that's really helpful. I think another side to this is that the time commitment, as in any volunteer role, is a bit like how long is a piece of string. To a certain extent, it's what's going on within the school. Like, like I say, when there's big change going on, maybe the time commitment is different sort of other times, depending on projects that are going on. But also, to a certain extent, you as an individual, as to how much time you can give. So I know in our governing body, there's a spectrum of how much time people give to the school amongst the governors, and that that does vary. There's kind of a minimum threshold in terms of attending those key meetings, and I always try and get into the school between the meetings as well, so it's kind of real and practical, and I get to know the school leadership team. But it does go on that kind of threshold depending on what you're doing outside of your volunteer role. I think a really good piece of advice that I had from the previous head teacher at the school was that I remember at the time being a bit apologetic. I'd been very busy at work. He was like, look, this is a volunteer role. I'm grateful for every hour that you give to this school for free. Like, I'm never going to sort of criticize or challenge. Like, I know how much you care about the school and how much you give to the governing body. So I think that's a really important kind of mindset to have, because otherwise you can either feel a sort of sense of guilt that you're not able to always give kind of more than you're already giving. And I think that's, it has to be a right balance. I will be honest, when I was chair of governors, that was significantly more time commitment, just in terms of support that needed directly with the head teacher. There were things that we were going through that maybe gets very much summarized up for the full governing body meeting. So I think, again, as an entry point, being a governor, say, linked to the finances or linked to a certain area, is probably like a more sensible entry point in, and then maybe progress through. I did some time as a vice chair of governors before I was then chair as well, so I kind of had my eyes open as to what I was taking on. But yeah, I think it will operate on a spectrum. And I think, to Alice's point just then, both in terms of being open about your capabilities and being honest about that after the recruitment, but also being kind of honest with yourself and the school about the time commitment. And there's times when I have to be very honest with the school. I'm exceptionally busy at the moment with this at work. Actually, look, I will do this, this, and this, but I won't be able to do extra this and this, and just being very honest with both the chair of governors, also the school team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really good advice. Be really clear, from the start, and I'll come to how we introduce you to a school, but be really clear about what time you can commit, and don't overcommit, because you want it to be sustainable.
Yes.
Just to finish up with this section then, Alice, can you give me maybe one or two things that you think you've benefited from being a school governor?
Yeah, absolutely. The list is so long. I could spend ages talking about it, but I suppose if I had to summarize it, the first thing would be the skills and the kind of knowledge that I've learned, mainly about how amazing people are that work in schools. So the juggle is real in terms of trying to kind of deliver this education for like the next generation, and to give them a kind of fully rounded curriculum as much as possible, on a restricted budget, investing in facilities. And I think it's really opened my eyes to the amazing work that teachers do and the leadership team of a school. I've also learned kind of specific areas. So I didn't really know what the term safeguarding was before, around kind of keeping children safe and what it involved. And I found that really kind of interesting to learn about. And to understand the kind of the policies and the practices that we need to have in that area, that I've then found useful for a charity that I work on, where I'm a trustee, and we take young people on trips overseas, and those skills that I've learned as a school governor have been really helpful to kind of apply across. Also mentioned earlier kind of energy outputs, and I suppose managing a kind of property estate and where the investment is needed, and that's all been kind of a new area for me that I've really enjoyed learning about. So there's a big piece on kind of learning skills and kind of topics which become relevant to different parts of my career. I think the second thing would be around people. So I'm really privileged to work on a board of amazing individuals who come from all different kind of backgrounds, some who are kind of previous head teachers and school experts, others who are kind of finance or legal. We've got parents, one of who runs a gallery. I've just met some really incredible people who've been incredibly supportive. We all share this kind of common passion for giving back, for supporting the school, and we meet, I guess, about 8 times a year approximately. If we have 2 meetings a term, because I'm on a subcommittee of the finance committee. And I suppose it's just been great kind of camaraderie doing that together. And I know that people I stay in contact with and might, help me at a later stage of my career, which is what I found again in a charity I worked for previously, where those people who were trustees alongside me have remained friends and contacts. So I think that would be the second thing, is the people. And then I think the third thing is the sort of, it sounds a cliche, but it's so true. It's that kind of feel-good factor. And I, had a baby about a year ago. And I think, a lot of people sort of can probably familiar with the experience that, when you're on maternity leave, you can feel quite out of touch. I hadn't been kind of in a professional career working full time for a couple of years, and I just felt a bit sort of, oh, have I lost my touch? Have I sort of gone into early retirement? And being on the school and being able to contribute and seeing that, despite my skills being rusty in some areas, I can make a difference has been amazing for my personal self-confidence. And I think for kind of keeping me in the swing of things, so that when I do, go back to a kind of bigger job potentially, I feel like I've kept my skills up, and it's not going to be such a big leap, because I know that I can add value, and I've been through that process of sort of doubting myself and then realizing I add value. So it gives me a huge, from a kind of self-confidence perspective, and the joy I get from knowing that I've been able to help people, and particularly when I'm very humbled by the work that they do and the fact that they're working full-time in these schools and incredibly challenging roles, to feel that I can kind of support them, I think has been a great great feel-good factor. So very much it's more than just a kind of throwaway line. It really has been a huge benefit to me personally.
Absolutely. And I think Alex is testament to that in terms of going on to more than one term, and I would definitely reiterate that as well. There is the feel-good factor, and you are volunteering your time and expertise, so it's nice to have that as a benefit when you see that you are having an impact. Brilliant. Thanks, Alex and Alice. I'm just going to move us on now. So looking at the commitment. So we've talked a little bit about the time that you would put into it. We did a survey of our volunteers a couple of years ago, and excluding chair of governor roles, because that is all on its own, but it's on average 7 hours per month. That ebbs and flows very much. But, most of the people, the vast majority of people we place into governor roles are working full time and would manage that 7 hours. That would be made up of usually around 6 to 8 meetings a year, reading your papers in advance, travelling to school, a couple of kind of daytime visits to schools so you do get to see them in action, and then ad hoc things. So next week, for example, I'm doing our head teachers appraisal. There's other things like that come up, but 7 hours roughly kind of covers it. Term of office in most cases is 4 years. So it is a long-term commitment that you make, but it does take a little while to find your feet, because your meetings are quite spread out and you're learning about a whole different sector for most people. But also the school need, fairly limited change. If you're going to be there and, share your skills, they need to know that you're there for quite a while, really. Obviously, it is a volunteer role. If your circumstances change or you move, you can just resign, that is fine and is perfectly well understood by the school, but just go into it thinking of being there as a long-term commitment. I've put travel on there just to kind of make sure that you know that when you apply through us, you can tell us how far you want to travel. So If it's that you want to support somewhere within 20 minutes of your home because you really want to be focused on your local community, no problem, you can put that in your application. If you've really got your heart set on a secondary school, you might need to think about travelling a little bit further because there's not a local one. So you can put all of that on your application, essentially. And then in terms of liability, your liability is shared by you and the rest of the governing board. So it is a shared liability. All the decisions that you make are as a board. As long as you're acting with integrity and honesty, there should be no issues around personal liability there. We do have more information about that on our website. And Alice, I think you were just going to mention something about the insurance that schools can get as well.
Well, I think it was just more for any volunteers. We wholeheartedly support what you're saying. If people are acting kind of in good faith, they're doing their best, they're being clear with the charity or the school about their input, then there shouldn't really be any risk. But you can obtain insurance. ICAW offer it. You can sign up there as a member of their community and seek insurance. And also the charity that you're working for, in this case, a school, should have indemnity insurance for the trustees or the governors. So it's just important to ask the question so that you're very clear on it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alice. And then how will you benefit? I feel like a lot of that has come out from listening to Alice and Alex's accounts of being a governor. But essentially, yes, you'll develop lots of transferable skills. You will get involved in things with the school that you haven't even thought about being a school priority yet. It's great when there's a big project like expanding the school to get your teeth into, but you might also be involved in talks with unions, for example, or setting up a new nursery in my case. There's lots of opportunities to really stretch the skills that you've already got and develop new ones. It is also a board level volunteer role, so it's a really good opportunity to be on that decision making board, and then who knows where you're going to go from there. It might be a good way to kind of start to think about non-exec director roles as well. It will give you really good foundations for that. Opportunity to give back, as we've mentioned, that feel-good factor, that you do see the impact that you're having as a school governor, and it's a really important part of the role. And lastly, the reason everybody does get involved is essentially to improve educational standards. It is about wanting the best for the next generation and wanting to make sure that they have every opportunity to thrive and become proactive citizens for the next generation.
And Emma, just briefly on that one about gaining sort of board experience, again, just to reiterate for myself, that chance that I've had to, whether it's chairing the finance committee or ultimately chairing the full governing body, such helpful skills for me for my professional career, in terms of I've then recently been applied for some non-exec director roles, and it's been hugely beneficial in that process to show that I have that experience. I can work through what the agenda of a meeting should be. I can bring together at times sort of disparate stakeholders together and get them towards clear outcomes from a meeting. So again, I always say to people about volunteering that it's you need to build up your sort of non-profit CV in the same way that you need to build up your professional CV. And often I know people who suddenly decide they want to volunteer and they apply for a role on the trustee of Oxfam or something, and then they suddenly realise past that process that there's people who maybe volunteer for that organisation for 15 or 20 years and supported in this committee or that group or done things elsewhere, and bring all those different experiences in that sort of sector to that trustee role. So I think it's really important to think about that for us as individuals, about sort of building up that experience and bank of experience that you can then bring, that will then open up doors for other opportunities in the future.
I'm conscious that we're just on time, that we're running out of time, and there's a question in the chat which would be great to talk through. I think Alex might actually be better placed for this one, but it was from Daniel around financial costs for new governors. So DBS checks, travel, just because it's the different nature between an independent school and a state school, it'd be good to understand what your experience is.
Yeah, I can just cover that one briefly. I'm sure Emma's got a view, but from our side, for the onboarding and the checks, that was costs covered by the school or the local authority in our case. And then within our school policy, there is a policy around covering governor costs, appropriate governor costs, travel, and other costs as appropriate. So there is a set policy there. Unfortunately, the school I'm governor at, it's literally at the top of our hill, so it's not something I've had to utilise myself, but we do have a policy and access for that as required. I don't know whether there's anything more on that one.
Yeah,
Emma.
I would just back that up. Every school is likely to have or should have a governor expenses policy. So absolutely for things like travel, you can ask about putting a claim in for that. I'd really encourage you to have that conversation at the start when you first meet in a school. And we really encourage schools to, at that first meeting, share their expenses policy as well. Yeah, lots of schools can provide things like childcare as well if they've got an after school club too, just to help minimise those costs. I'll just touch on the training that we provide. So once we have placed you, essentially you would apply with us, we will match you with a school, we'll make those introductions, go through the process. Once you're actually in place, you'll be able to access monthly webinars from us. We've got e-learning modules on our website, and you'll have access to something called Governor Hub and Governor Hub Knowledge, which means that you'll be able to kind of use that as a resource bank, and it really helps kind of grow your knowledge in the first year. I'm just going to forward on because I can see there's a question about how to actually apply. So to make it really clear, you go to our website, governorsforschools.org.uk, you'll put in your online profile, really highlight your particular skills and your motivations. And then we have partnership managers for each of the regions, and they'll be able to look at opportunities, make a suggestion to you. And once you're happy, make that introduction with a school. You'll normally then go through that school's recruitment process, which will include things like disclosure and barring check, often references, and then usually observing a governing board meeting, then having your application voted on there. Okay, great. So I've whizzed through the last bit, but there's lots of information on our website about support that we provide, and you can access all of that before you even apply as well. So feel free to go and have a look at our Introduction to Governance e-learning. So it's another way to kind of put into context everything that you've heard today. Any other questions we needed to touch on?
Done such a good job there, Emma, that it's all been covered. We've got the opportunity, if people want to submit any questions, subsequent to this, so they can submit those through to info@charterpath.org.uk. We'll also be sharing a recording of this webinar on the website and the slides. So for those who aren't able to access, they'll be able to access those in the future, or if they want to refer back to some of the materials that you've taken through, Emma, then they'll be able to go back through the slides. So yeah, on behalf of all the team at Charterpath, a massive thank you, Emma, for all that you've kind of shared and taken us through during the session. And thank you to everyone who's joined and attended today, and those who join in the future and watch back through the recording. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Emma.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.